Imagine you're driving along and you hear that siren behind you and see the flashing lights. You pull over and put your car in park as the officer walks up to your window. "Do you know how fast you were going?" asks the officer. A few minutes later, you're handed a ticket for speeding and you go on your way. The next week, you're in court where the judge sets your fine at $100,000 for speeding. No big deal. You pull out your American Express Centurion card, pay the fine, and then recover your Maserati from valet parking and head back to your 15,000 square foot mansion. Of course, if you'd been driving a Toyota and lived in a 900 square foot apartment, your fine might have been only about $100 instead of $100,000. Something very much like this happened in Finland in 2009 when a driver was fined over $100,000 for speeding. Other large fines have been slapped in similar situations, including then NHL player Teemu Selanne's 2000 episode where, he was only fined $39,000. The idea of adjusting fines based on a person's ability to pay is called day fines, and you'll soon understand why. Day fines are in use throughout Scandinavia, as well as Germany and parts of South America, and have even been tried here in the US of A. And they're the topic for this episode of Progressive Solutions. Near the end of my last video on the death penalty, which is linked up here and in the comments below, I said I'd be covering other criminal justice reforms. Well, this is the first. Day fines are easy to understand. The idea is that the more you can afford to pay, the more you should pay, even for the same offense. There are claims that groups across the political spectrum, from the ACLU to ALEC, support this, but I haven't yet found conclusive proof. Side note, if you happen to find a specific source, please put it in the comments below. After all, how often do these two groups agree on anything? Also, feel free to comment on this and other videos. I'd love to hear from you. Now, that Maserati-driving, mansion-owning, limited edition charge card holder can probably more easily afford a $100,000 fine than someone struggling to get firmly into the middle class can even afford $100,000, but no system is perfect. And at least with day fines, even if imperfectly managed, the result can have tremendous ripple effects, as I'll explain later in this video. The basic system starts by assigning fines for violations and low-level crimes, not in terms of specific dollar amounts, but in terms of days, meaning how many days' worth of disposable income a person should pay. For low-level offenses like a speeding ticket, a 1 or 2 day fine might be assessed, or more as the amount over the speed limit goes up. Fines for simple littering could be 1 day, but dumping a truckload of garbage could be fined at, say, 10 to 20 days. Stronger crimes, up to the point where we decide that the criminal needs to be locked up for a while, could have fines that are much larger. In Germany, for example, the range goes up to 360 days. The other major factor is to determine exactly what a day means. In Finland, for example, they take into account the fact that you don't keep all of your income, you pay taxes, and you have regular household expenses. So 1 day is calculated as 1/60th of your monthly income, or basically half of your gross pay for that day's work. Finally, multiply the number of days of the fine by the daily income rate to get the actual amount of the fine. It's simple. Except not exactly, because what actual solution is even that simple? Here's one way it gets difficult, especially here in the US. No court is going to be able to look at your tax filings just because you got a speeding ticket, so income will have to be self-reported. Of course, there would be harsh penalties for anyone caught underreporting their income. Overreporting carries its own penalty, as you just have to pay a much larger fine. And there needs to be a way to fact-check that self-reporting without creating new problems for the offender. Calling someone's employer, for example, not a good idea, as it's really none of your boss's business if you get a speeding ticket. There are also some other problems, but before we get to them, let's look at some benefits of moving to day fines. More equity in punishing low-level criminals and offenders, as fines are based on the ability to pay, so even wealthy people will feel some of the pain of paying the fines. Lower costs, as jail or probation sentences, which cost a lot of money to administer, are replaced with fines. Costs could go even lower by copying Finland's method of allowing defendants who don't want to contest their case to just pay the fine instead of going to court, much the way speeding tickets are often paid here. A lot of people currently sentenced to short jail time could pay a fine instead, thus reducing the number of people in our jails, which means People convicted of low-level violations and crimes have a better opportunity to get their lives back on track. They don't even have to miss work, except for maybe part of one day for a court appearance. But there are also some problems with this system as I've described it. For example, some wealthy people don't have incomes in the usual sense of the word. Some corporate CEOs don't have big salaries, they take their money in stock options. So their wealth increases as the value of the company's stock rises. So some billionaires could get away with very small fines if it's only based on their income. And as I noted in an earlier video on taxes, which is also available up here and down in the comments below, wealth rises much faster than income, so wealth is a better measure of ability to pay. We should be looking at ways to levy fines based more on wealth, or at least a mix of the offender's wealth and income. There are also a number of things we need to do to set up a day fine system. Step 1 is changing the law to allow for day fines to be assessed. The details have to be worked out, specifically what crimes will be placed into the system, the definition of a single day, and the number of days each offense can require in payment. Fortunately, there are plenty of systems already in place, including several experiments here in the US, so these details shouldn't take that long to figure out. Next, we need a method to spot check people's claims of income or wealth. It would be far too expensive to check every offender's claim, but if we can check even a small percentage and make the punishment for lying severe enough, cheating will be strongly limited. One idea would be to reward people whose claims are checked and shown to be completely true, perhaps by refunding part of their fine. Fortunately, several studies of experimental systems show that the vast majority of people will report their income, even including illegal income, quite accurately, so it shouldn't take a lot to ensure that this continued in a ramped-up system. Judges and court staff would need the minimal training in the new system, and again, experimental systems demonstrate that this can be done very easily as the system is pretty straightforward. Finally, we need a method of enforcing fines. Even now, a lot of fines just aren't paid, and as a lot more people will be fined rather than jailed under this new system, and since the fines in some cases will be a lot higher, we need to have more people following up to make sure those fines are actually paid. And again, fortunately, it appears from the experimental systems that people are more likely to pay their fines under a day fine system than they are under the current system, so even the enforcement rate would go up all by itself. The end result will be worth the effort and more, as the effects can go far beyond adjusting fines based on the ability to pay. For one thing, it can save money. Despite the extra administrative costs of the new system, between not locking people up, which saves a lot of money, getting a lot more money in fines, and having higher fines for wealthy people and a lot more money coming into the system that way, the net balance is a tremendous positive. And it reduces the human cost of locking people up. Second, as I mentioned before, studies across the U.S. have shown that in this new system, a lot more people are willing to pay their fines than under the current system. This may be because those who can least afford it also know that even wealthy people are going to be having to pay a decent fine under the new system. Third, it can be used to eliminate those extra fines that are tacked on as a way of covering costs. These extra fines are usually used to keep poor people from finishing their sentences, and many of them are hauled into jail just for failing to pay the fines. In Florida right now, people are being stopped from voting if they haven't paid those extra fines. Alternatively, these so-called legal financial obligations could also be scaled based on a person's ability to pay, thus eliminating the extra pain that many people face who want to pay it but can't, and also making it more fair. Fourth, a lot of communities rely on the revenue from these fines to pay some or even most of their cost of local government. This new system will make it easier for communities to use these fines without falling into the traps of racial profiling or discriminatory abuses. Also, they'll be balancing their budget more on the backs of wealthy offenders than poor ones. Fifth, because a lot of communities rely on the revenue from these fines, it's much more likely that they'll go after wealthy offenders. After all, if police are encouraged to catch people who can afford to pay large fines, and they will, they'll go after the wealthier people as well. If people who struggle to make ends meet can see that the privileged classes aren't so privileged as they used to be, they'll feel better about themselves and about our society, and this will likely result in a lower crime rate, especially for the so-called petty crimes. The effect can be the narrowing or even eliminating of the so-called school-to-prison pipeline that deprives far too many Americans of the ability to pursue the American dream. This means far fewer adolescents in the criminal justice system, which means far fewer large crimes down the road. And fewer small crimes means less that the police have to deal with, freeing them to go after the more violent crimes and after white-collar crimes. And catching and heavily fining or even imprisoning white-collar criminals will add to the positive feelings in a virtuous circle. Finally, once implemented, it's simple. Those who can afford to pay more, and once the fine is paid, the sentence is completed. Justice is better served when the pain of punishment is spread more evenly across the economic spectrum, and society is better served when people can move forward with their lives. And if groups across the political spectrum really do support this system, laws creating day fines should be very easy to pass. There are a lot of ideas like this one slowly making their way into various societies, ideas that are so self-evidently good, to most people anyway, that it doesn't take much to convince them. Over time, I'll be presenting more of them. Meanwhile, I welcome your comments below about this video and about other topics and issues you'd like to hear about. And of course, please hit those thumbs up and subscribe buttons below and spread the word. Thanks for watching. Stay progressive.